afternoon. I'm Sheila Lawrence, the Social Services Manager for Independent Living, and I want to thank you all for coming to our Home Health Educational Series talk. Today we are very fortunate to welcome Mary Beth Gallagher. Dr. Mary Beth Gallagher is a board-certified psychiatric nurse practitioner with a doctoral degree in nursing. She serves as Director of Hospice of the Valley's Dementia Program, which has received national and international awards for its innovative approaches to dementia care. Dr. Gallagher was selected to serve on the expert panel on advanced dementia for the National Alzheimer's Project Act in Washington, D.C., where she was also inducted as a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing. Her work with Hospice of the Valley's Dementia Program was awarded first place by the International Journal of Palliative Nursing in London. Her commitment to improving dementia care was initially inspired by her own experiences as a family caregiver, sharing the journey with her loved one with dementia from diagnosis to death. Please welcome Dr. Gallagher.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for sitting through that, because let's face it, the only person who really wants to hear it is my mother, who would be saying, say it louder and read it slower. So when I came here today, as you know, the parking can be a little challenging, right? And so they assigned me a parking spot, and I got to pull up, and I see in front of me, future resident, and I went, in my dreams! It's just so nice to be here. I really love this place, and you're so lucky. Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, you are, and hopefully someday maybe I'll get to be here. So we're going to talk about dementia, and here's the thing. Of course I have slides, but really I'm feeling sassy and free, and I'm willing to speak about whatever, wherever you want to take this topic. But let's set the stage with a couple of basic pieces of information. Does that sound okay to you? And then we'll progress. Okay. Now, let's look at the 2022 statistics from the Alzheimer's disease facts and figures. It says that easily over 6 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's disease, okay? We know that easily over 6.5. And meanwhile, half of people who have some form of dementia don't even have a diagnosis. So the numbers are even bigger than we can imagine. When we talk about Alzheimer's disease, the greatest risk factor for the older onset Alzheimer's type that we're going to be talking about is age. So you either age and you take the risk, or if you don't live to a certain age, you don't have to worry about the risk. And here's where the risks start to happen, around age 65. Well, we know that every day at least 10,000 baby boomers turn 65, right? And 1 in 9. Okay. And then when we get to 85 and older, which is one of the fastest growing segments in human population, right? That they think, the stats suggest that a third of people who are 85 and older have some stage of some type of dementia. Okay? When we look at Alzheimer's disease, because that is the most common type of dementia, that's the one that we have the most research on so far. And when we look at that research, it suggests that 2/3 of the people who have Alzheimer's are women. Older blacks are twice as likely, and older Hispanics are about 1.5 times as likely as a person their age to have dementia. Now here's the staggering statistics. Did you know that Arizona has the highest growth rate of people with dementia in the whole United States? Right? I know, we are number 1. Okay, but that does raise the most compelling question. How do we respond skillfully and compassionately to every person living with dementia and their care partners, the people who are going to support them? Look to our right, look to our left, look to ourselves. It's going to touch everybody's life in some way. Dr. Maya Angelou has that great saying something to the effect of, when we know better, we do better. So today, the overarching goal is just to help you understand dementia a little bit more in general terms, how that affects the brain, how it would affect anybody's brain. How does the person with dementia perceive the world around them so that we can, again, with kindness and with knowledge, respond in ways that uphold a person's dignity and help maximize everyone's quality of life. So one of the things, so you heard that I'm with Hospice of the Valley, and maybe you've heard that we just opened a new dementia care and education campus in Arcadia. And it has an adult day center and right next to a child care center, which is really fun because of the intergenerational joy. It has a dementia-specific hospice inpatient unit. It's got a really tiny assisted living, and it's got an education building where what we're going to try to do is spread the knowledge about dementia for all people in all walks of life, where we're going to experiment and try to innovate so that we really can provide excellent care for everybody. And the education, of course, is free. So dementia, let's talk about that. The most frequently asked question is, what's the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? Well, depending upon which literature you read, there are 70 to over 100 different types of dementia. And dementia, so it's describing a category of diseases that impact the brain in many ways. But the most common form of dementia is what? What have you just learned? Alzheimer's disease. Very good. Okay, A++. But there are others that I bet people in this room, maybe you have, or maybe you know somebody who has. So there's Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common one. But then have you ever heard of dementia with Lewy body? With what? Dementia with Lewy bodies. Okay. Or Parkinson's disease dementia, right? Not everybody with Parkinson's gets dementia, but some people will go on eventually too. Then there's something called vascular dementia. Well, what's the #1 killer of Americans, people? Heart disease, right? Cardiovascular. So if we're talking about our cardiovascular system and that it's not in good shape, let us pause to ask ourselves, what about our cerebrovascular system in the same body, right? So some people have vascular dementias. Now you know what it looks like in someone who has a major stroke, right? You can really see the signs. But remember that there are these tiny little silent strokes that can happen in different parts of the brain. And we don't see it in the person, and the person doesn't recognize it themselves. However, if you get enough of them to a certain part of the brain, any part of the brain, then those brain cells don't get the glucose and the oxygen and everything they need to live. And so those brain cells start to die. And that can cause a vascular dementia. So it looks different in every person because it really depends where those little clots are happening. Does that make sense? Okay, because this is my nap time. Okay, so I'm really trying to hold it together. Okay, so we've talked about Alzheimer's. We've talked about vascular because cardiovascular is so prevalent in our society. Vascular dementia certainly can be there as well. We talked about dementia with Lewy bodies, which includes Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's disease dementia. Then there is a subset of dementias that is not widely known, but it happens to be a subset, love of mine, called frontotemporal lobar degenerations. So the first parts of the brain that it generally hits are here and here, right? And oftentimes, this type of dementia hits people in their mid-40s and their 50s. And because these types of dementia are not recognized as much in our healthcare system, oftentimes individuals who wind up with these types of dementia wind up in jail or in a locked psych unit as middle-aged crazies, as compared to when they actually get their brains imaged and we see, oh my goodness, there's shrinkage, atrophy in those areas. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, but there are so many other types of dementia. The latest research also tells us that even if a person is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, easily over 50% of those individuals also have another type of dementia, oftentimes vascular dementia. So we're stepping into a world now where we used to like to compartmentalize, thank you for your help, You enter like, okay, this person has Alzheimer's, this person has vascular, but now we're seeing it's kind of a mishmash, or that's what we are in the latest of our discoveries. Okay, so I'm going to move on, but did I explain myself clearly? Are you with me?
Yeah.
All right, so there's more, thank you. All right, so now what we're going to do is we have to talk in generalities about the parts of the brain that become impacted, and then how that shows up in the person, all right? Of course, let's start with a couple of givens. If you know one person with dementia, all you know is one person with dementia. There's enormous variability from person to person, and you've probably seen that yourself. Because it really depends on what part of the brain is impacted, your personalities, your how you've used your brain before, if there's any trauma. There's so many things that figure into this, you know? So we really do have to speak in generalities. And I'm going to speak basically from the Alzheimer's perspective, again, because that's the one we know the most about. Okay. So we talk about dementia. What's one of the first things to go? You and I joke about it all the time.
Memory.
Memory! Ding, 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 ding. All right, so there's different types of memory, right? There's short-term memory. What did I have for breakfast? And there's long-term memory. Let me tell you about when I was 18 years old, okay? Which one is the one that goes first in Alzheimer's disease? Short-term, right, okay. Now, let's narrow in even more. Who here's had colonoscopy? Good for you! Okay, so for those of you, if you haven't had it yet, A, you must. You're missing out on such a thrill. So let's walk through those steps. So we won't talk about the prep. We'll show up the next day for the actual colonoscopy. So they put a heparin lock in you, so they have access to your vein for medications. And then the nurse says, I'm going to give you some medication, it's going to help you relax, and then we're going to start the treatment, right? And so we go, ooh. Okay, so they give us the medication, and the nurse walks away, and we're looking around, and we're waiting, and maybe we shut our eyes, and then we're looking around, and we're waiting, and people are walking back and forth, and then we go, excuse me, when am I going to have my colonoscopy? What does the nurse say? Right? And then we say, it is? We're so happy. And the nurse says, yes. Now sip this apple juice slowly, and once we know that your stomach can tolerate it, we can discharge you. Okay, great. So we heard what the nurse said, and we started to sip our apple juice. Then we put the apple juice down, and we look around, maybe we close our eyes again. And then the nurse walks by later, and we say, excuse me, when am I having my colonoscopy? Right? I mean, that happens. And the nurse says, you just had your colonoscopy. And we say, I did? And then, oh yes, drink your apple juice. Okay, so this is referred to as amnestic memory, like it never happened, like it's amnesia, right? And one of the medications they give us is that we're not going to remember what happened, okay? So it's working. When let me show you this part of the brain. Okay. See if, let's see, I'm afraid of pressing a button. Okay, all right. See, this is a big word here. It's written in small print, but then it points to this area right here. Okay, so we have one on the right and one on the left. Let me come over here. See, right in there, that area there and there. Okay, part of that area is called the hippocampus. So we have one on the right and the left. This is get to know your brain time. So our hippocampi have certain jobs. One, take in brand new information, encode it, put it on a shelf, so to speak, store it, so that when you need it later, here it is, okay? Two, my sense of time. Did 5 minutes just pass, or was it a week? Now, so we'll get back to that. The other one is, how do I find my way around here? And I would imagine when you were new to here, there was some interesting wayfinding challenges, perhaps, right? Okay, but over time you were able to learn it because your little blessed hippocampi were working, okay? So one of the first areas that's hit in the Alzheimer's type of dementia happens to be the hippocampi, okay? So look at them up there, and then I want you to come down here to that slide. Let's see if there's a difference. Up here, there and there, sorry, and then come down here, right? So this is showing change over time. In imaging, the report would say hippocampal atrophy, meaning that the cells in the hippocampal regions died and the area shrinks. So the cells whose job it is to take in, bring in new information and store it are dying. That's why the person says the same thing over and over again, or asks you the same question over and over again, because those cells are dying. Does that make sense? Now, I'm going to say some things, and you may feel badly because you may say, oh my gosh, I do that. But everything I say don't do, I've done hundreds of times, because when we know better, we do better, right? So this is the moment to know better and do better. If somebody were blind, you wouldn't say, I need you to try harder now. Come on, try harder. You need to do this. You can do this. Come on. We wouldn't do that. If somebody's hippocampal cells are dying and they're doing the best they can, it doesn't help sometimes when we're trying to give them those, those saying, well, you were able to do it yesterday. How come you can't do it today? Or, Mom, I just told you 10 times. And Mom will go, no, you didn't. Now, it's a fool's mission to go, I'm going to convince her, because no one has ever won an argument with a person who has dementia. Nobody ever will, or that's the way the saying goes. You will just get into the endless cycle of, yes, I did, no, you didn't, yes, I did, no, you didn't, yes, I did. And if you've got enough energy to follow that trail, good luck to you. But does that make sense? That the person, those cells are dying, and so the memory they're unable to retrieve. So, lesson number 1. No matter how many times a person with dementia asks you a question, how do you answer it? As if it's the first time. Right, now, for those of you who've been married forever, none of this, because there's no it's 10 o'clock, or, right? Because, oh, you can read all that, right? Even if I'm saying the right answer, you can read all the other ways of communicating. And people with dementia are not stupid. They have brain changes, and they're doing the best they can. They can still read all this. This is old embedded skills, right? So it's very, very important. Now here's a safety thing about memory. Please don't get up. Do you need anything? No, you don't need anything. Okay, this floor is slippery because I just mopped it. Call me if you need anything, and I'll just be over there, okay? Okay. Clunk, right? Mom, I told you. You didn't tell me that. Because to Mom, she's incapable of holding on to that. Same thing with driving. I look right. That's not right, that's left. I look left. I look right. Maybe I see a car coming here. Okay, note to self, car coming here. No car coming here. I forget the car's coming here. I drive through the intersection. So I could keep unpacking this, but I'm going to stop there and say, this short-term memory stuff is really interesting to contend with. Now I'm going to flip it a little and go, well, wait a minute. Yesterday I said this and he was able to remember, but today he's not. So actually I don't think that he's trying hard enough. People with dementia have what's called windows of lucidity, where out of nowhere, suddenly there's a higher level of ability. Have you ever noticed that in somebody? And you're going, what's this? The person has no control over it. But these windows of lucidity will arise, which then makes you think, I'm going crazy, right? Because you're seeing a difference. So nothing's really fixed, but we have to work as best we can with what's in front of us. Does that make sense? All right, good. So then I'm going to go back and get on to some other dimensions. Nope. All right, thinking and reasoning. Who here has tried to think and reason with a person who has dementia and who hasn't had it work out so well? Yeah. Now, so from my culture, so we have never had cultural backgrounds too. And I'm from a small town called Brooklyn, New York. And so if you don't understand me, my cultural background urges me to lean in, say it louder, and use my hands, because this will really help you. Whereas it just annoys you, doesn't it? So don't do that. Okay. But thinking and reasoning require shared insight and judgment of what is really going on. We need shared insight on and judgment of the same realities. So if you're trying to think and reason with me, but I'm perceiving a completely different situation than you are, of course we're not going to be able to, agree. there's gonna be some tension there. All right, how about this? Because driving is one of the most important issues. So let's say your person has dementia, and they've been able to drive pretty well, but now all of a sudden their sign's not so good, right? Maybe there's some scratches, maybe there's a police report, and things like that. And so and maybe even you've had the discussion, "Hon, I'm not really sure you should be driving anymore. I'm really concerned about safety." "I'm a perfect driver. You're just trying to," that kind of thing. That can really cause, and my hearts go out to you. But the thing is, when you try to explain and show the evidence of the scratch in the car, or the police report, or the doctor said it, my memory has no recall of that. So it's like you're making it all up, because my brain can't access that. Make sense? So you're expecting me to look inside and see these discrepancies from my prior behaviors and abilities. But insight, for many people with dementia, can be one of the first places that becomes impaired. Some people with dementia know that something's wrong, right? We know. They know something's off. I'm not the way I used to be. Other people do not, and there's a fancy word for it. It's called anosognosia. The ability to have insight, the ability to look in, because that's just yet another brain function. So if that part of the brain gets tapped, you won't be able to know that what you're doing is what you would have never done in a pre-disease condition. I'm going to stop there for a minute. Am I conveying that enough? So that's why, so if I don't have the ability to look in and to have insight and good judgment, and you're trying to think and reason with me as if I do, it's not going to work, is it? And as a matter of fact, it's going to make me really frustrated. I'm going to think you're an idiot, or you're trying to spoil my day, and so now I'm going to get angry and I'm going to walk away. And that wasn't your intention at all. Your intention was to love this person and keep them safe. Wow, really challenging. Language. There's different parts of the brain in the way that we process languages, right? But the most simple way to say it is, there's expressive language. You have thoughts and feelings, and you put words to them, and you express yourself. Expressive language, right? Okay, now there's receptive language, that as I'm speaking to you, your brain is able to process the concepts and understand. So expressive and receptive language. In dementia, over time, a person's language will become impaired. Sometimes it's the expressive first, finding words, using sentences, etc. Chair. Other people, the first thing for them is going to be understanding what's being said to them. Now that's a tricky one, because again, we have deeply rooted behaviors that we've been doing for decades, right? And we're going to hold on to those. And one of them is, have you ever had a person walk up to you? I bet here you have. And clearly they know who you are, and they're talking to you. And so on the outside you're looking at them, and on the inside you're going, who is this person? Who is this? Has everybody here had that experience? Okay, good. I mean, bad, but good. So how does that feel when it's happening? Tell me your emotional experience, your reactions. Are you comfortable?
No.
Stressed. Frustrated. Embarrassed. Scared. Maybe. Uh-oh. Yeah. Okay, so but notice what you do on the outside. Every single one of us. Oh yeah. Nice. And then the person goes, so nice to see you. And we say, so nice to see you too. Liar, liar, pants on fire, because you don't even know who you're talking to. But we all do it. It's referred to as our social facade, our social behavior, right? So that, again, deeply rooted. But meanwhile, so for somebody with language who's having difficulty understanding, we really want to look into their eyes and go, are they yesing me because they understand, or are they just doing this because it'll make you go away sooner? That said, it brings me right to the point of a lot of us, I wear hearing aids, and a lot of us are hearing impaired over the years. And if you don't have your hearing aids, you'll look more confused than you really are. And I feel so badly because some people with dementia are staged deeper into the condition than they need to be, but it's really that it wasn't set up for them to hear accurately, that we didn't eliminate the distractions around them so that they could focus more successfully, that we didn't slow down what we were saying so that they could process it, that we use fewer words and more visual cues instead of, would you like something to drink? I have water and I have juice. We could just go, would you like something to drink? Really different if your brain is working in a clunkier way. And I have to be super careful about that. And any of you here who culturally have an Irish background, because Irish cultural people, why use 100 words with 10,000 flowery words? Could be so much more interesting, right? So anyway, we have to behave, we need to curb that. Okay, so that's just about language. So you're still sticking with me here? We're just talking about the tip of the iceberg, different parts of the brain. So when we talk about language, lots of times we say it's, maybe our expressive is here and our receptive is here, generally over on this left side. As I understand it, cursing is on the right side. I don't know. I don't even know. Okay, function, sequence, and planning, what does that mean? Think about the things that you do, like when you get dressed in the morning. That's a tremendous amount of stuff you do. You choose, then the sequence of, you don't stand there and go, so let me get this straight. How does this go? Does the underwear go on first and then the outerwear? And yet, when people have dementia and lose that ability to sequence in step 1, step 2, then they get really discombobulated, right? Choices can become overwhelming. Well, if choices of looking in the closet are overwhelming, let's bring it down to 2 choices. Do you want the red one or the blue one? Because maybe the person can make that choice, right? But keep it simple so that it's not frustrating, but it still speaks to the dignity of the individual. Or, for a person who's really getting advanced, if I see that when I hold up 2 different color outfits and they are even struggling with that, I want to spare them the embarrassment, so I'll say, well, how about the pink one, because this looks really pretty on you. And then the person just has to say yes. And we've spared them from moving into that, feeling uncomfortable. So see, I'm talking about changes in all of our brains that could happen, how it will impact our moment-to-moment functioning, and what we can do if we don't have those changes in the brain to keep the person feeling safe and dignified, comfortable. I know I'm kind of all over the map here, but if you're following me, I can keep doing this. Are you okay? Okay, great. So function, sequencing, planning, I think about Thanksgiving is when the Alzheimer's Association starts to get the calls. You know why? Because putting that meal together is really complicated, and even if you've been doing it for 50 years, when your brain starts to change, getting the portions and the hot stuff out with the hot stuff and the cool and this and that, that's when families start to know, wait a minute, something's slipping here because this isn't happening. Okay, personalities, can they change when a person has dementia? The individual differently, and then respond to them differently. And it's not from malice of heart that you don't want to be involved in the person, but isn't it true that sometimes we're so afraid of saying and doing the wrong thing and we're just not sure, that we feel so uncomfortable that we don't put ourselves in that situation. So it's not that we don't care, but it's kind of scary to step into something and to be unsure. So yeah, we can see personality changes for any number of reasons. Also, some people who are known as the epitome of grace under pressure suddenly can have a hair trigger and be really loud and reactive. One of the reasons that is because you know what? Up here in this part of our brain, right under your forehead, is your ability to control your emotions. Now, when we come onto the planet, we don't know how to control our emotions. It's not like we're little infants and we're saying, well, why don't I just settle down and let my mother sleep? I can wait another hour even though I'm hungry and wet. But over time, hopefully, we start to learn how to self-soothe and to regulate our emotions. But it's all learned behavior, which means all it is a bunch of brain cells that have learned how to communicate to each other and hardwire so that that's the way we act. Once those brain cells die, we don't know how to regulate our emotions anymore. The person is doing the best they can, and every one of their reactions is a very human reaction that they can no longer dampen down, if you will. Does that make sense? So then we talk about behaviors. It's so scary because everybody talks about, oh, what if they're a person living with dementia who starts to develop challenging behaviors? Well, again, here's where I get really excited because when we know better and do better, the number of behaviors in people living with dementia are going to go way, way down. Because unintentionally, behaviors are often triggered by the way the caregiver is approaching or saying or doing, or the environment. It's just setting up conditions for the perfect storm, if you will. So when we know better and do better, we'll be able to have much less. Of course, we definitely look for changes in mood, anxiety, depression, because if all those brain cells are dying, there could be some brain chemistry stuff that we need to work with. We already talked about insight and judgment, the ability to look in and to know that something's wrong. Even if someone has the type of dementia where initially they do know something's wrong, as the condition progresses over time, over the years, the ability to know that something's wrong will start to diminish, okay, as we understand it today. Lastly, visual recognition and spatial orientation. What the heck does that mean? Okay, so your eyes, as we know, as we age, our visual acuity starts to diminish, doesn't it? But the eyes are taking in the information. That's just the first place that we see. The next is back here in the head, takes the visual information and has to process it. How high is it? How low is it? How near is it? How far is it? What is it? So when the disease hits these areas where the visual information is processed, now I'm going to perceive my world very differently, right? So even though I'm this far away, maybe I feel like I'm on top of you, right? Maybe you go to, oh, here's a great example. Okay, so we got the shiny stuff here, but then we've got this stuff here. So maybe this is really different for me as I'm trying to navigate it. There's so many different examples I could give on that. Okay, so I'm going to stop and take a breath. That's the tip of the iceberg. Can you appreciate the more you start to just understand our brains, what they do, and what it might be like if they don't work? That this will help inform us more and more of how to be with somebody with dementia, to keep them safe, to keep them comfortable. And Alzheimer's disease and the other forms of dementia that we talked about, they're diseases of the brain. But they're not diseases at all of the heart, the soul, the spirit, whatever terminology you want to use that fits for you. Those are disease-free areas. There's the message of hope for now. While we don't have a cure yet, while we don't know how to stop the progression of the condition, if we learn how to work with the brain as best we can, but then to remember, most importantly, tap into the heart, the soul of the individual, and you're all experts. You don't need to go to school for that, do you? You're all experts in that. When we learn how to do that, we can still have very deep, meaningful connections with every person with dementia until they draw their last breath. That's the message of hope. Okay, so this brain picture, I only wanted to use it to illustrate the hippocampal atrophy that we talked about, right? The difference, boy. Now here's the front of the brain, and here's the back of the brain. And we think right here is where the Alzheimer's type of dementia begins. That's the temporal lobe, and so it shows up as word finding, language difficulties, and short-term amnestic memory problems, okay? What we need to understand for now is that over time, this disease, see now we're getting more gray areas in different parts of the brain, that signals that the disease is spreading and that more and more brain cells are being impacted, which means if every part of the brain has a job to do, and then those brain cells die, now we have a person who's becoming more dependent upon us to have their needs met. They're becoming more vulnerable. But the good news is, again, each person here is an expert in being a human being, so you know what human needs the person has, and all of you know how to anticipate the needs of someone else. Even if you don't do it well with people, if you have a dog or a cat, I'm sure you're anticipating their needs. So these are skills that we have inside us that we can build upon. Most people ask a question about the progression of dementia. Again, if you know one person with dementia, all you know is one person. I have to think of you not just as a person with dementia, but how's your overall health? right? So many variables will figure into this. But if I have to give you just an overall blanket statement, we think that in the mild stage where we're hearing that the person's having impaired memory, maybe some personality changes, and spatial disorientation, so people are starting to maybe get lost. It's taking them longer to find their way, etc. But you know what? I'm going to stop here because almost always the question is, wait a minute, I've got some memory stuff. I've got some word finding difficulty. Anybody here have moments of word finding difficulty? Yeah, okay. So as I understand it, from about the age 30 or 35, our brains start to shrink. How disappointing. But if this is the way the Creator made us, we must move on. So what's normal is, with age, normal age-related changes in our brain are that we occasionally find we have word-finding difficulties. Tip of the tongue moments, right? Given enough time, though, that word will come back. We'll be able to retrieve it. It takes us longer to retrieve it, but we will retrieve it successfully. Example number one that we all know. You're talking about this movie you saw, and like, what's the name of it? Oh, what's the name of it? And finally, friends are like, can we move on in the conversation? You know, just give it up. And then, at 3 o'clock in the morning, you wake up and the name of the movie's right there. Has that happened to everybody here? Yeah, normal age-related changes in memory. Give it enough time, we retrieve it. Okay. Next, everything I'm going to say that's normal is occasional. So we have those tip-of-the-tongue moments. Okay, who here has been in a parking lot and you have to do your car like, in order to find it, you know? You only ran into the store, what, 15 minutes ago, and yet you can't find your car, and you're trying to look like, oh yeah, I know where it is, because you don't want to be embarrassed. Okay, occasionally, right? But you find your car. These types of changes are normal. Collective deep breath. Now, here, if we start to see changes in memory and function that are interfering, that are different than our baseline, right? Some people have been getting lost from the moment they left the womb. You know what I mean? They're directionally challenged. So we're not talking about you. We're talking about others. Okay. So it's all about a change from your baseline, who you've been, now who you are now. If it's happening more frequently, this does not mean you have dementia. But do you know that dementia is the most feared condition of our time? When we were kids, cancer was the most feared, right? But now it's dementia. Okay. So when we start to notice changes like this, oftentimes it's very normal that people will keep it as their dirty little secret because they're embarrassed, they don't want people to treat them differently, and it's really scary to think about going to a healthcare provider to get worked up, right? For all legitimate reasons. However, what you need to know and to share with everybody, please, is there are so many reasons why our memory, our word-finding difficulties can be interfered with. Let me just give you a couple of them. You can have sleep apnea and not know it. Boom, you could go get that corrected, couldn't you? And it will deliver delicious oxygen to your brains. You could have hypothyroidism. You could be taking an over-the-counter medication that is actually not helping you as much as it may be harming you. You could be taking a prescribed medication. There's just so very, very many reasons why we can have impaired brain functioning. So that's why it's so important to talk to somebody you trust. And if you get in there, this is just my opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you go in there and they go, hey, you're getting old, what do you expect? It's not a big deal. Run to another provider, is my opinion, because you're worth having it checked out. We need to look a little deeper if it's happening every single day. Don't you think that would be good for you? You deserve it. So go to somebody, and essentially all you want to do when you talk to a healthcare provider, in my opinion again, is you want to give them the evidence. This is the way it used to be. This is the way it is now. This is the way it used to be. This is the way it is now. I like those bullet points, and if you can just help, then I can be a better detective. You know? Oh, okay. And then they're going to do a workup, and we can talk about that later. But while we're in this mild stage, I just really wanted to let you know, so don't forget that this doesn't mean you have dementia. This means, though, please go discuss it with someone so that you can be the best you can be, okay? Because maybe we can really help. However, if you do get a workup, maybe they are going to suspect some form of dementia. And so you'd be in this little mild category for a while, but then we're going to move into the moderate stage. So remember I showed you the pictures of the brain and how it started to get more gray? So if less parts of your brain are working, you might have increased confusion. If you have increased confusion, you'll probably have increased frustration. The word agitation, I gotta change that. You may have changes in your wake and your sleep cycles because the brain determines when you wake and you sleep. You may sleep longer, you may sleep less. You may sleep in fragmentations. Oh, I sleep this chunk, but then I'm up, and I sleep again. You may flip your days and your nights, just all sorts of changes. Language problems, I think we already belabored that point. And then challenges doing daily tasks. This is when we're wondering, can you really function safely and independently as you move through your day? Or is this a time when we want to get creative about offering support services so that we can help you to stay in your home and be the best you can be? Oftentimes they say the moderate stage is 3 to 5 years, but again, we have to think of all the other health conditions a person may have, etc., etc. The advanced stage, this is kind of interesting. The advanced stage of most terminal conditions doesn't last 1 to 3 years, but dementia can be 1 to 3 years in the advanced stage. This is one of the reasons why Hospice of the Valley is really trying to innovate ways to maximize quality of life for the person living with advanced dementia, and of course their care partners, because now caregiving is getting even more challenging, isn't it? And then we'll move into end of life at some point. And I can talk more about this, but I want to get through this and then answer some questions. It's really up to you. Okay, so you see the sepia, I guess you would call that color, that picture. Do you know who that is? That's Dr. Alzheimer's first patient when Dr. Alzheimer's decided to call this Alzheimer's disease. I think she's somewhere between 52 to 54 years old. So this was the poster girl for Alzheimer's disease, ladies and gentlemen. Now, but here's what I tell you. The difference between these two facial expressions, us. We're the difference. We determine the difference, okay? And I have a whole person there. Because sometimes when you get a disease, the person just becomes the focus, let's say, of their brain or something. And what we want to do is remember the whole person. So people with dementia oftentimes live in a world of no. No, you can't do this. No, honey, let me do that for you. No, please don't go out. No, I don't want you to drive. No, 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 no. So let's stop there. How does no feel? Just even looking at me like this. How's your brain feel when I do this? It's unpleasant, isn't it? Most of us don't like it. And some of the more fiery personalities in here would be like, oh, you're not the boss of me, right? It's going to get it going. So what we want to do is naturally, there are certain things that we need to keep the person safe, right? We need to limit certain things. Here's where the art of dementia care comes in. Have you ever danced with somebody and they're such a good dancer that they're leading you and suddenly you're like, oh my God, I'm really good at this. I guess I didn't realize how good I am at this. And they're just moving you around so gently, but they know how to do it. Have you ever done that? It makes you think that you're a really great dancer. That's the art of dementia care, to lead without having the person feel led. That's what we're going for. There are many different approaches, hours that I could be talking about, but I just want to talk about yes and. What's really hot in the industry right now is improvisation. The art of improvisation is that no matter what comes at you, your response is yes, and then you create something. So a person living with dementia, what we want to do is, let's say, okay, in a memory unit, some person will be at the door. I want to get out, I want to go home, I want to go home, right? So normally we might say, no, you live here. The person's looking at, I don't live here, I want to go home. So we can keep saying no in all the trying, thinking, and reasoning, or we can look at the person and say, yes, you want to go home, and I want to help you. See, right there, instead of fighting, it's like, oh, you will? But now, I need to get your mind off of it. But I'm going to have to lead you without you feeling led. So I might say, it is 112 out there. We're going to need some water. Come with me, we'll get some water, and then we'll we'll get going. So now I'm bringing you over here, and now I might be able to go, hey, those cookies look good, don't they? And so maybe I'll do this. So I'm bringing you, and I'm trying to make your brain a better offer, so to speak, because I know that your short-term memory doesn't work. So I'm going to try to entice you and direct you over here instead of over here. So that's just one way that we want everybody with dementia to feel validated, to feel affirmed. And we do it with our bodies, the way we pace, right? You process information like this. I mean, much faster than that. But when a person gets dementia, they start to slow down their processing. So the speed of their processing may be. So if you're like this, and there, that's outpacing. The only person capable of changing is you. The person with dementia is doing the best that he or she can, right? So we need to look at the person and figure out, are we talking too quickly, moving too quickly, etc., etc. Because when we pace with, the person can feel comfortable. Anyway, at Hospice of the Valley, our mantra for all of these years has been, join the journey. Because the person with dementia isn't capable of changing. They're doing the best they can. Let's step into their world and just see what we can accomplish that way. When we look at the international literature on what best optimizes quality of life, well-being for people with dementia and their caregivers, the literature says it's these components. Informational support, meaning just what I'm telling you now. When I was a dementia caregiver, I knew none of this, and some of it wasn't even recognized or published yet. I say to myself, wow, I sure wish I knew then what I know now. It could have been better for all of us. So dementia education can make or break. And that's why we have this brand new educational center. Next, emotional support. If you are a dementia caregiver or have been, oftentimes people will be kind enough to say, how's John doing? And you go, he's all right. You've learned to not get into it usually. But how many times has the person in a social setting or your healthcare provider said, all right, enough about John, you. How are you doing? This is really tough. We know that dementia care partners have high levels of morbidity and mortality. When we get some more support services for them, we'll be able to help them. Then instrumental support, or as I like to say, what am I supposed to do? I've got this 95-year-old couple. She's taking care of him, and I'm about to go, hey, listen, in your spare time with all of your technological computer savvy, why don't you get on the internet and figure out what resources are available to you financially, legally, etc. And then, of course, then you need to decipher who are the people who are snake oil salesmen and the ones that are legit. Why don't you get that done? Okay, put it on your to-do list. Is it going to happen? No. So we need to get these services readily available for people and make the connections. And when we do that, it really helps. Also, respite. You know, so we have volunteers, and I know that a lot of the dementia caregivers say to me, I live for the 2 hours on Thursday when the volunteers come in. I can hold it together for those 2 hours, but if I didn't have those 2 hours, I wouldn't be able to make it. And what did COVID teach us? COVID teaches us that we better have a plan B and C besides just a plan A. Because for those people who are just couples and your whole support system lives on the East Coast or something, which is a pretty typical Arizona scenario, when COVID hit, boom, it took somebody out right away. And we were stuck with these people and we didn't know anything about them and who else was to support them. So let's, hope for the best but plan for the worst, as the saying goes. So for those of you who, I just want to let you know, and then we're going to open it up to questions, but there's a couple of things I brought with me. One of them is our supportive care for dementia program. It's free. Let me just lead with that. I don't want to bury the lead. But if you feel that this education and support would be helpful if you're in a situation, or if you're ever in a situation, just know that if you call this number, this program, a dementia educator comes out to see you. Because when you see a person with dementia, when they come into a clinic, there's all this social facade, and you only get a 15-minute snapshot, and who knows what you're going to see. When we walk into a home, a whole lot of information right here for us that we can really work with. Safety. even. So the dementia educator comes into the home and figures out what's going on, what's most important to you, where are you at, what is it that you want help with now. We have an agenda, but we keep it in our back pocket because we want to earn your trust and meet you where you're at. Then there's a lot of phone support. If you've ever been a dementia caregiver, you know that nothing goes wrong Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Right? Always the middle of the night or on the weekend, you call the numbers you have and you get, if this is an emergency, please hang up, and otherwise call us on Monday morning. Great. So what happens? Well, the literature tells us that this is what 911 is called and when people wind up in the emergency room. So everything I said don't do with a person with dementia is what happens in an emergency room. God bless the emergency room staff, okay? I mean, God bless them, but they're not set up for a dementia-friendly approach, right? So we want, as much as we can, to keep people living with dementia out of the emergency room, out of the hospital. 75% of people with advanced dementia who go to the hospital, 75% of those incidents are preventable. When we know better, we do better. So we have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week phone line. You will never get an answering service. There will always be a skilled nurse or social worker on the end of the line, and they will ask you what the problem is. First and foremost, they're going to listen for danger to self, danger to others, because that's the most important thing. But after that, they can calm down and say, tell me what your challenge is right now, and they'll coach you through it. They'll say, why don't you put the phone down, I'll stay here, go try it. Or they'll say, do you want to try it, and then may I call you back in an hour to make sure you're okay? And by wrapping our arms around individuals, they feel, I can do this. You know, I can make it to the morning, or I can make it to the week, or whatever's going on. Okay, so I just wanted you to know about that, and there's flyers up there in case you need it. If you're a dementia care partner, or if you have people that are far away, we have 2 virtual support groups. Now you may say, oh, I'm not a support group person. But these are really interesting. You can bring all of your dementia-related questions. It's a safe, non-judgmental environment that's on Zoom, and it's for free. If anything I've said today you would like to hear over again, like probably slower, I just want you to know we have a tremendous amount of educational videos on our website that are broken down into 10 to 15-minute segments. So you can just kind of watch that. And they're identified so that you can move through them. Again, when we look at, the research just came out again 2 weeks ago, I think, from UCSF about the benefits of hospice services for people living with dementia and for their loved ones as well. There's a phrase I love, cure sometimes, treat often, comfort always. So the overall goal is how do we optimize well-being, how do we maximize comfort for all people living with dementia and all of their caregivers? And the answer is, when we know better, we do better. So there's a couple of other things I have up here that I just want to share with you. The Zoom support groups are here. The Supportive Care for Dementia program, that free program, is here. We have a memory cafe. If you want to get out, now you have to go to Arcadia, but we have a memory cafe. It's free, and the person with dementia and their care partner goes, and there's music and just arts and all this kind of stuff. It's like from 10 to 11:15 on Monday mornings. Again, it's free. What happens is then that person living with dementia, if they're comfortable, stays with the people with dementia, and the care partner goes and hangs out with other care partners, and they kind of support one another. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you is something that we just created. And so Dee is doing this. We have, Kathy Brown had me come here today, by the way. And whenever Kathy Brown rings my phone, I answer yes, because she is one of my most esteemed colleagues. Yes. Yes, I know how you love it when we make a fuss over you. You really like that feeling, don't you? Yeah. Okay. But I wanted you to know, so bereavement, when you have gone through grief, it's really tough to navigate, isn't it? And the world doesn't understand grief, and they think like, it's been a year, get over it, you're pathological. And then none of that is true. We just created, I'm going to be so interesting to see how this works out, a bereavement group specifically for people who have been dementia caregivers, because I think the issues are more complicated. Oh, I yelled at her. oh, I did, now I learned I should have done this, but I did this. It's very nuanced, and so this support group is just getting started, and I'm really interested in watching it grow. Okay. Questions? Why did you come here today? What do you want to know?
Would you please comment on diet as in reference to this?
Question is, would I comment on diet? Yeah. You know, it's so interesting, but as I understand it, the research findings tend to mirror exactly what our grandmas were saying. Eat the colors of the rainbow, you know, stick a couple of vegetables and fruits in your diet. Try not to eat too much fat, animal fat, you know, all of these kinds of things. It's, as I understand it. Now, when we look at the research specifically, the MIND diet, the Mediterranean, and the DASH diets kind of put together seem to be the hottest in the industry right now. As far as, not sure if it will prevent it, but maybe it will delay onset. And the way I feel is, if I delay it long enough, I'll be dead. Or close to it. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah. But that's where I would go. I would go to the MIND diet online. Yes.
Is it possible to get a copy of all of these screens for friends that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. Sheila's got it, so she'll be able to send it to you. Yes. Green.
Hold on.
Oh, okay. Pink first.
Does the person
know what's happening to them?
Does a person know what's happening to them in the beginning? Well, that's what I was talking about before about that anosognosia, that fancy word. Some people have insight and say, wow, I'm really experiencing this. And they'll say it to somebody else and they'll go to their provider and say, this is what I'm noticing. Great. Other people do not. And remember I told you about this little subset of dementias called frontotemporal? One of those called behavioral frontotemporal. The first presentation is that they don't have insight and judgment. So I just complicated the answers, but most people, I would say, do have some insight initially and over time.
Well, we all know what we're getting worse.
Right.
Finish the sentence, but that seemed to be one of the problem issues. But when you get to the problem issue, you realize what's happening to you. That's
Most of the time, yes, but not always. Yeah. Oh, green, yeah.
Green.
Sorry. Are you in green or blue?
Microphone next. I'm curious to know why in the beginning you said that Arizona has more prevalent people with
You're curious as to why Arizona has the highest birth rate.
this.
It's in the water! Ah! It's rural. You know what? Can't exactly say, but I bet everybody would guess. We're a retirement destination, right? So, you know, we're older. And age is the greatest risk factor. Yeah, that's what I think. Yes. Yes, Stephanie's dad.
Do you have any good news from our friends in the pharmaceutical business?
You know, just this morning, I read, yes, there are many, many things. I have many friends who are Alzheimer's researchers who are using infusions and studying biomarkers and all of that kind of stuff. Things are still, according to what I understand, in the phase 2 and the phase 3, so we're still figuring out safety and we're still figuring out effectiveness, and the numbers of participants in the study aren't huge so that we can generalize. And you might even ask me the question about the hot button aducanumab or Aduhelm, the one that came out, remember, and Medicare wasn't going to pay. Is somebody going to ask me that question? Good, okay. But so yes, there are promising things right around the corner. Fingers are crossed that some of them will turn out. Yeah.
How about a medicine like Prevagen? Does that help?
Ask him.
They found the research that ice cream is actually more effective.
No. Woo-hoo! More ice cream. No, the Prevagen, you know, think about this. One of the prominent researchers in the United States, when I've heard people ask him questions like that, specifically, he leans in and he goes, well, it wouldn't hurt, you know, but that it won't necessarily do anything, and that we have to be very careful because we are all concerned about our brains, aren't we? Therefore, we're vulnerable. And every month when something new comes, drink wine, eat chocolate, you know, then we're like, okay, and then we go to Costco, and then we buy, you know, the supplements. But really, you know, let's use our common sense. And also, you know, when I had said to anybody taking Prevagen, if you're taking it, is, what have you noticed?
I haven't tried it.
And it's at least $50 a month. But I'll tell you, oh, and also, if you can slow down, because you know how they always advertise Prevagen during the national news in the evening, which is really expensive advertising. But if you look up or if you Google Prevagen and lawsuits about making false claims, your answer might be there.
Okay, don't waste my money.
Or we can just say real basic knowledge. Why don't you try it for a month or two and see if you notice any difference? Yes, yes, what's your question?
Could you put that website up again? It was up there briefly.
Okay, sure.
And could you explain anything about Lewy bodies?
Yeah, absolutely, okay. So, dementia with Lewy bodies. When I think about that, when I'm listening, or a person tells me about the changes of how they used to be and how they are now, when I hear about this person, well, let me start with the initial, what would be in front of me maybe, is I'm thinking about visual hallucinations. People who have dementia with Lewy bodies generally have, it's very common for them to have visual hallucinations, oftentimes of animals or small people, but it can be many things. And even in the early stages, I've had patients who have been my greatest teachers who are aware that they're having a hallucination and that it's not really disturbing to them, it's just kind of interesting. But as the disease progresses over time, the person starts to not know that they're hallucinations, right? And so it can be disturbing or not. So that's one thing I think about. Next thing I think about is Parkinson-like symptoms, right? So maybe shuffling gait, stiffness, slower movement, maybe tremors, you know, those kinds of things. Another thing I think about is that maybe the person, when you ask about their history, they have REM sleep behavior disorders, like, you know, real vivid nightmares and movements in their sleep, maybe some depression leading up. I also think of fluctuations in levels of cognition. Remember before when I was talking about windows of lucidity, that people with dementia have these moments when suddenly they just seem more capable than others. People who have the Lewy body variation, oftentimes, I can be with them one day, and see this is what they're capable of, and this is what they're not capable of. I can go visit them a couple days later, and I go, wow, my notes were really off. I was really missing things, because today, they seem to be able to do this and this. That fluctuation is common. Also, I think about blood pressure dropping, falls, and as a nurse practitioner, I also am very careful with medications, particularly if they're brain medications, because people with Lewy body, we have to be super careful about their sensitivity to those medications. So I'll stop there. Does that help? Okay, there's a website if you want to know more that is my go-to place. I have deep respect for them. If you put down LBDA, Lewy Body Disease Association, lbda.org. All of the information, the latest information, anything you want to know is there. Yeah, welcome. Any other questions? Whew, really put your brain through a, right? Whew. Yes. Oh, behind you.
Is there a spiritual dimension to any of this?
Oh, wow, what a great question. I'm biased. I'll just say, I will just say that, again, it's a disease of the brain, and that's all it is, a disease of. I've seen people do amazing things that I cannot give you a biological explanation for. You know, just like we see in hospice. Sometimes people are alive way past eating and drinking, and we don't understand it, and so that invites me to hold the space for the mystery of spirituality. I'll also say that I've had a number of experiences of people who were really, really frightened, caught up in a paranoid delusion that we couldn't get them out of. And because they had, let's say, a certain spiritual practice, that because I was aware of it, I was able to crawl into bed and hug them and say, let's say the Lord's Prayer. And this would be, I think of somebody who had no verbal abilities at all. And so I was holding her and I was saying the Lord's Prayer with her, and halfway through she stopped screaming, and then she started reciting the rest of the Lord's Prayer. So, brava, there's so much more to be revealed. Okay, listen. Thank you so much for the respect and your kind attention, and I really just invite you to reach out to Hospice of the Valley, the Supportive Care for Dementia program. But thank you so much. When we know better, we do better. We're a community.
Thank you very much. If you want copies of her stuff and don't get it,